Clark, everyone. It is 8:02, so we should get going. Welcome, everyone, to a different story. We've done this before in person, and now we're trying a little bit of a different story. So welcome. I want to welcome everyone warmly, and I do want to let everyone know that there are still 25 raffle tickets available for purchase, and they'll be available for purchase until 8:30 p.m. tonight. So if you did want to purchase one of those, this would be a good time to do that. That you can check the chat box. We're going to put that raffle link in the chat box now. So just wait a few moments for that, and that should be appearing. I see it now. So anytime before 8:30 for that. Again, do please stay muted at all times. Just would help us make the evening go smoother. In the upper, I don't know which corner it is on your screen and mine, but in the upper corner here, you should see a little button that says speaker view and gallery view. And you want to be on speaker view. If you just see my giant talking head right now, then you're already in the right place and you don't have to do anything at all. But if you see a bunch of little squares, you can go ahead and click on that button and it should switch it to speaker view. There may be specific moments in time tonight where we are going to ask you to hold your chats. And that is just so that we don't lose a link or we don't lose something. So if we do ask, please don't chat during that time. Don't use the chat bar during that time. And one final reminder, this event is being recorded. And so we just wanted you all to be aware of that, and it will be posted online at some point in the future. Great. I don't think I missed anything, but I do want to double check with Toby. Is there anything else before I introduce our, and we go into the Havdalah?
I think you've done a fine job, David. Thank you so much.
Okay, great. So now I'd like to introduce and hand it over to Sharon Newman and Rabbi Sachs, who are going to lead Havdalah.
Thank you very much, David. I'm actually going to start right off the bat and contradict David, because one of the things that we want to do with Havdalah, because we know that some of you have Havdalah sets at home, but many of you may not. Hopefully you figured out a way to cobble something together if you'd like to participate, is that if you switch to gallery view, and I know David spent a lot of time making sure that people are on speaker view, so you'll want to switch back after Havdalah. If you switch to gallery view, you'll be able to see, hopefully, all the Havdalah sets, like mine is in front of my computer here, and I see that Wendy Hayes has one up, and some others as well. So if you don't have a Havdalah set, that's a way to sort of bring the light in from our entire community, not just one household. But afterwards, go back to speaker view like David requested of us. I am going to light my candle. If you haven't already lit yours, I invite you to do that. There is a link for the Havdalah prayers if you need them in the chat box. And so we'll start with the candle, and then we will turn things over between Sharon and me for our service. And I'm having match issues, so it'll be just a moment. All right, I'm on match number 4. The technology's working, but.
Had a light with flint and steel.
And now we'll begin Havdalah, and I'll invite Sharon to start some music for us. La 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 Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei beriah ben borei beriah ben. And When I Leave, a poem for Havdalah by Stacy Zissuk Robinson. I'm not ready to leave this place, this time, this rest. I'm not ready for the separation that must come, not while I still smell the sweetness of cardamom and cloves. I want to linger in this holy time, this sacred promise, and be, just be. But the stars are dancing, 1, 2, 3, 1,000, infinity, and more. They scatter like pebbles strewn on a field of velvet night. And there are numberless shades of dark, broken by those infinite and slivered pebbles. And oh, my feet ache to explore that vast expanse, even as my heart yearns to stay, to linger in this place where I can still taste the wine that teases my tongue. But I have blessed that thin line that separates dark from light, from sacred and holy. And I have found rest and peace and comfort in God. And when I leave, though I ache to linger, I will take with me the sweet scent of spice and the teasing taste of wine, and I will hear forever the guttering of a candle into a cup of wine, which will forever be the sound of promise and the promise of return. We'll continue with our blessing over spices so you can lift your spice box.
Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei minei besarim borei minei besarim.
Farewell, Beloved, a Havdalah meditation by Alton Sullivan. If you listen, listen. If you listen, you will hear Shabbat returning to her distant place, retreating slowly, quietly, gently opening the space between Chodesh and the whole, between the holy and the mundane, separating eternity from daily routine. If you listen, you will hear the music of Shabbat rise, leaving behind the scent of cinnamon, cardamom, and cloves, a taste of sweet wine, a braided beam of light beyond time, a memory and a promise. La Yehudim hayta ora v'simcha v'sason vikar. We once had light and gladness, joy and honor. May it return. Bim hera v'yamenu yavo elenu. Come speedily in time, bringing blessings of peace, a world of wholeness, when beauty and wonder, justice and mercy, kindness and love reign on earth. We continue with the blessing over our braided candles, so you can carefully lift those.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei meorei ha'esh borei meorei ha'esh.
Sabbath by Stuart Kestenbaum, one of our presenters tonight. I want us to make this pilgrimage every week. After we have kindled the Sabbath candles, walk away from the house and stand in the back field away from the road's light and traffic, so that the stars become brighter and we can look at our own house for what it is, a shelter from the wilderness that surrounds us, the ancient light of the Milky Way and the steady beating of the wind, rattling ash and spruce, endless wind, Endless night, a harmony so frightening we head back into the house pretending to be cold. Could we add a minute each time to what we can bear, so that years from now we will stand there all night in the slow circling of heaven, the dipper emptying itself, the fox and deer brushing against us as they make their rounds. And now a blessing of separation.
Ya la 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 la, ya la 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 la, ya ya la 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 la, ya la la, ya ya la 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 la, ya la 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 la, ya la 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 la. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech העולם המבדיל בין קודש לחול בין אור לחושך בין ישראל לעמים בין יום השביעי לששת ימי המעשה ברוך אתה אדוני המבדיל בין קודש לחול.
So you can take a hold of your wine cup and your candle and sip the wine, and then extinguish the candle and listen for that sizzle.
המבדיל בין קודש לחול, חטאתנו ימחול, זרענו וכספנו ירבה כחול, וכחדים בלילה. שבוע טוב, 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 שבוע טוב. אליהו הנביא, אליהו התשבי, אליהו, אליהו, אליהו הגלעדי, במהרה בימינו יבוא אלינו, עם משיח בן דוד, עם משיח בן דוד, מרים הנביאה, עוז וזמרה בידה, מרים תרקוד איתנו, להגדיל זמרות עולם, מרים תרקוד איתנו, לתקן את העולם, במהרה בימינו, היא תביאנו אל מי הישועה, אל מי הישועה.
Shavua Tov, we hope a good and sweet week ahead. Now you can follow David's instructions and switch back to speaker view as our program continues.
Great. Thank you so much, Rabbi and Sharon. That was lovely. So we're going to continue on. It's about 8:17, and I'm sure you are really ready to hear these stories. Oops. I'm going to mute. Okay. Are we muted again? I think so. Great. So I know everyone's probably very interested in getting to our stories, but I have one more person to introduce that would like to say a few words before we do that. And that is our president of Bet Ha'am, Lynn Erbach.
Thank you for gathering together at A Different Story. Beit Ha'am has always been a warm, inclusive, and engaged Jewish community. I am so proud that we have managed to maintain that essential part of ourselves while maintaining physical distancing and sheltering at home, protecting our own health as well as those of our broader communities. I am amazed at how well our rabbi, staff,
Video, turn on video.
sorry about that. I am amazed at how well our rabbi, staff, and volunteers have responded to this new world. For years, we have been talking about live streaming our services so that those who live far away or are unable to leave their homes would be able to worship with our community. But our Wi-Fi wasn't strong enough. We didn't have enough time. We didn't make it happen. It was a stroke of luck that we invested in an upgraded Wi-Fi system this past winter. In mid-March, when COVID-19 changed our world, we knew we needed to do something, and quickly. We got our services and school live streaming within a week. Nothing like a crisis to get you moving, I guess. Now, we've moved past that basic part. Many, many congregants have stepped forward to help others with our community, with running errands or stopping by for a virtual visit with someone who's sheltering at home alone. Others have organized virtual song sessions or discussion groups, and we are about to start virtual schmoozing before Shabbat services on Friday evenings. Rabbi Sachs is busy doing virtual pastoral visits, arranging for reformatted and rescheduled B'nai Mitzvah, and holds a weekly online check-in that anyone can join. We recently had a Tat Shabbat service and Havdalah online, and this past week, we had a virtual song session, morning minyan, discussion group, and virtually observed Shavuot and celebrated the confirmation of our 10th graders. Yes, our building is closed, but we remain a warm, vibrant, and engaged community. Our people have proven again and again throughout the millennia that, as noted in our Bible, we are a stiff-necked people who will not be defeated by adversity. Our lives have been upended, but we will survive, and our community will remain strong and relevant long into the future. It means a lot to me that you have chosen to spend this evening with us, supporting Judaism in Southern Maine and Congregation Beit Ha'am. I think I'm supposed to mention that there's a link to make donations in the chat bar. Thank you for coming tonight and supporting Beit Ha'am. Please enjoy the evening.
Great, thank you so much, Lynn. And I know we're all excited. I'm just gonna do a quick introduction again about a few things before we begin our official program, and then we'll get started. That donation form was put as a chat link. If you would like to make a donation, that is in the chat. And I just want to remind everyone, we have 9 minutes left before the raffle closes. Last I checked, we had 25 tickets. I'm not sure how many we have left now, but if you'd like to, that's going to close very shortly. And we will also put that link into the chat bar. Great. So again, my name is David Bass Clark. Welcome, everyone. It's really exciting to be here. And I think this format is working rather well so far. So that's kind of exciting as well. So tonight, just wanted to, I'll be introducing our writers in a moment, our authors. And after each reading, one of our members of our congregation, Andrew Kosak, will be moderating questions from our audience. So please, post your questions in the chat bar, and Andrew will pose those to our authors, as many as time allows. And during the readings, please reserve the use of the chat bar for only that. And you can, between readings, if you have things you want to say to the group, feel free to use it. But during the readings, only questions for the authors. And one more thing I wanted to try, which is, and I think we've said this earlier, but we won't be able to hear applause tonight. But it might be kind of nice after each reading if we did do the international, or the ASL sign rather, for applause, which I think is kind of both hands up and waving like this. So we can practice that now a little bit. And you'll be able to see that we've gone back and forth between gallery view and presenter view, but in gallery view, you'll be able to see everyone doing that all at once. Okay, so I think that's about it. So I'm going, before I do that, Toby, is there anything else that we'd like to do before we jump into our program this evening? We're a few minutes ahead of schedule.
Oh my goodness, never expected to hear that. Again, I want to thank everyone for coming and spending the evening with us. I see not only members of Bet Ha'am, I see friends from afar, and I'm just so delighted that we could do this together. And no, I don't really have much more to say, so I hope that we can move forward with our first reader. Take it away, David.
Great. So I'm going to do a little quick intro now, and then we'll have a reader come on. Our first author is Lisa Mayer. She's known as the main Rebbetzin. She and her husband, Rabbi Sruli Dresdener, are the spiritual leaders of Temple Shalom in Auburn. And when she's not making music and enlivening worship and caring for her young twins, Charlie and Johnny, she does some theater up in Lewiston. She's a director of the Public Theater. And so we'd like to warmly welcome her to read. She's going to read a piece called Newlyweds for 57 Years. And with that, I will turn it over to you, Lisa. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Can you hear me? We were sitting with my parents on the curvy white chairs in the lobby atrium of Norwegian Cruise Line's Breakaway with 2,000 other people, most of whom had been refilling their rum and ginger beers since 9:30 that morning. The twins were at night activity. The cruise director, Alvin from the Philippines, was laughing into the mic at his own jokes, which he did a lot. He was choosing couples for the newlywed, not so newlywed game. The giant jumbotron behind him glittered all the way up to the next deck, which was packed with more drinkers goggling down at the rest of us. So, who's the longest married couple on the ship? There was a noise from some folks on the other side of the lobby. 50 years! 50 years! The couple was cruising for their anniversary. I don't know what came over me, but I wasn't about to let some pisher parvenus diss my parents. Those people had only been married 50 years. 57! I started screaming, jumping up and down, defensively. 57! 57! 57! My husband Sruli echoed enthusiastically, jabbing at the air over my parents' heads. Right here! Right here! Naturally, Alvin noticed. Then he noticed my dad's cane. 57! Congratulations. But you can take a pass if you want. A pass? A pass? My parents had taken us on this cruise because since we moved to Maine, we don't get to see them for very long chunks of time, and the twins are growing up and have just hit that not quite as annoying to older people stage. When the cruise idea was first bandied about, my mother had said, "How about next spring?" And my father had said, "How about soon?" which scared me. My father turned 80 this year, and it's sobering to see this force of intellectualism, musicianship, and discipline morph into a slow, benign, and very easily tired man just because of stupid age and stupid hydrocephalus. So, no pass. No pass. How about soon? How about now? And as the crowd cheered, my mother, my father, and his cane rose and made their way through the curvy white chairs to the stage. I remember my father shooting me a look right before he got up. I just knew it said, "Wow, Lisa, thanks for volunteering us because this is going to be so much fun." They were couple number 3. Couples number 1 and 2 were easy to find. Number 1 had been married only 2 days before. "Do they look happy to you?" I nudged Sruli. "Resigned," he said. Couple number 2 was a riot. She was black and demonstrative. He was white and silent. They earned a place in the crowd's heart because of their passionate kissing when they were chosen. They'd been married 4 years. The Jumbotron now featured my beautiful mother, 100 feet high in her drapey, sparkly cruisewear, my handsome father in his new black sweater and pants with the white sneakers. My face was frozen in the shape it makes when you try to eat a hamburger that is too big for your mouth. Sruli's jaw was stuck on gape too, as were his eyes, and there were wrinkles of disbelief on his forehead. I crouched down on the floor in front with my camera phone. Maybe at some point this would feel real to me if I saw it on video. The three wives were escorted out of earshot first, and the questions started coming. Where did you go on your first date, and how much did you spend? Everyone knows the story of their parents' first date. Mine had gone to see the movie Operation Petticoat, and then out for ice cream. Chocolate for my mother, vanilla for my father. It had been a blind date. My mother saw him for the first time when she opened the door of her parents' house in Philadelphia. 18 years old, jet black hair, hazel eyes, dressed in a 1960s frock and heels. She took one look at my 5'7" father, kicked her high heels off, shoved them under the living room chair and said, "I'll get my shoes and be right down." By the second date, they knew, and the second date was the next night. My father got Alvin's question wrong. He said they went to a restaurant in New Jersey and spent about $50. When my mother came back and said Operation Petticoat and the crowd groaned, she considered my father's answer. "That was our third date, babe," she said to him and to everybody else. She turned to Alvin. "Hawaiian Cottage. It was a swanky supper club with an orchestra, and it was in New Jersey." She looked lovingly at Dad. Then she explained to Alvin that $50 in those days was different than now. "What, like $5,000? He laughed respectfully. Lucky for 57 years, couple number one and couple number two got it wrong. In fact, I don't think number one got any questions right. Husband number one was probably resigned to a long, cold night in the brig. Next question. Who from your wife's family would you least like to be stuck on a desert island with? Easy. My wife's brother, my father said. Why? Alvin was no Julie from the Love Boat. He wanted dish. He wanted dirt. Why your wife's brother? And then my father, my PhD in physics, professor of mathematics, author of books, composer of symphonies, speaker of 6 or 7 languages, high holiday cantor, Talmudic scholar, and leader of a shir, a study group for 40 years, father said in front of 2,000 people, because he's an asshole. The place erupted. My mouth couldn't close. I looked over at Sruli. His mouth couldn't close. This could not be happening. My father had never said a word like that in his life. Alvin was ebullient. They got that question right. Ding, ding, ding. The next questions compared a male anatomical part to a limousine or a Mini Cooper, and the couple's love life to either Thanksgiving, grateful for what you can get, or Memorial Day, commemorating the dead. But the final question was the bomb. The men had gone out, the women had answered, and now the men were back. It was the question you expect on the Newlywed Game, the one where the original TV host, Bob Eubanks, leers at the contestants, his perfectly polished teeth poised like fangs. Where was the weirdest place you ever made whoopee? And that's when I realized that maybe this wasn't such a good idea. Here we were in front of thousands of people. It was our first night on the cruise, and now everyone's gonna know. Everyone wants to know. Sruli didn't want to know. I certainly didn't want to know. My mother tried to be decorous with her answer. Oh, you know, she said, not looking at the audience, in bed at home. That's not weird, complained Alvin. Come on. No, in bed at home. She didn't say anything more, and Alvin could get nothing from her. But now it was my father's turn. And he didn't hesitate. On a train. Ah! The crowd started to hoot and holler. A train, a train, a train? Oh, these are my parents. Rita, Alvin stretched out my mother's name in complete delight. You didn't tell us. He leered Eubank style. What train? From New York to Miami, my father said, matter-of-factly, on the Jumbotron, in front of 2,000 people. Ding, 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 they won anyway. 57 years, Alvin kept laughing into his mic. What's it like to be married 57 years? They won a bottle of champagne, championship t-shirts, and other tchotchkes from the gift shop on deck 7. And all the rest of the week, as we cruised to the Bahamas and back, my parents were recognized on every deck, in every buffet, in every restaurant, at every slot machine, and in every elevator. Plus, the video was playing on continuous loop on cruise TV in every stateroom. Hey, aren't you the newlywed couple of 57 years? And then turning to me, wow, you don't hear that anymore. Wow, you really don't. Winning the newlywed game would be a cool story my parents would be able to tell their friends, the other once forceful and accomplished friends, now with long-worded ailments of their own, who won't need to be told what it's like to be married 57 years because they are too. My parents are good sports. You have to be married 57 years. I wonder what it's like to be married 57 years. I look over at Sruli and I think, we'll never know. We started too late. We'll never make it. We'll never even get a chance to get the answers wrong.
Wow. Thank you so much. I was laughing, and it took an interesting turn at the end there. So I appreciate you. That's amazing. I'm going to turn it over to Andrew now for a Q&A with our audience. Don't unmute yourselves, okay, unless you're Lisa. But what we'd like to have everyone else do is, if you'd like to ask a question, go ahead and put that into the chat bar. So take it away, Andrew.
Thank you, David, and thank you, Lisa, for that wonderful story. Your story ends on a wistful note as you state that you and Sruli probably won't make it to 57 years of marriage. So while you won't make that milestone, are there aspects of your parents' marriage that you'd like to emulate?
Wow, that's a good question. You know, it's an old-fashioned marriage, but I mean, my father is a PhD, but my mother has a master's degree. She's not a schlepper. It's just that they had their roles, you know. My father was the breadwinner and my mother was the homemaker. And they were very comfortable with that role. My father was very happy and proud that his wife was beautiful. And my mother was very proud that her husband was an intellectual. I think with Sruli and me, it's a little more even. I guess modern marriages are. And I guess it's a good question. I think what I would really love is this kind of like just absolute couplehood that they had. It was so natural. It was just so easily natural for them.
Thank you. Someone else would like to know, do you write your stories in Hebrew and Yiddish as well as English? And do you get any help from Sruli writing your stories?
First of all, I will tell all of you, Sruli is not allowed to listen to my stories. He's not allowed to help me write them. No, I don't even let him come into the room when I'm telling them. So the answer is no. If there's something that while I'm writing it, I have an issue or question, I'll say, hey, and I'll try to keep it vague so he doesn't really know what's going on. I don't know what it is. I try to keep it separate. We work together all the time. We're musical, and all this. And at just some level, I'm afraid. Plus, you know, he's not really my audience for this. So I don't know, but the answer is I do not write in Hebrew, I do not write in Yiddish, but I do use words from both languages, reingespritzt, in a lot of my writings. So this happens not to have too many of them. I don't think I have so much Yiddish, do I? But I do have a lot, but I always explain it because I speak in front of audiences of all kinds of traditions, and that's why.
Okay, thank you. Are your parents watching now, and have you shared your story with them?
I did feel obligated to share the story with them, yes, but no, they are not watching now. And whenever I even speak in their neighborhood and their friends come and see me, I can't have my parents in the audience. I just, you know, and they're just quelling the whole time. It's not like they're sitting there like this. I could fall on my face. They'd be so proud of me. Oh, Lisa, that was so wonderful. But even with all that, I can't, I don't know. I mean, it's the problem when you're writing about people who are still around you all the time. I've written about Sruli actually once or twice, but more benign. Like that makes sense.
Have you written stories about your home and life in Maine?
Yes, I have. I have quite a few stories. I have stories about the time Sruli broke his wrist hiking. That's a Sruli and Maine story. One of my stories is called A Rebbitzin's First Christmas, about my experience at the East Auburn Baptist Church. Quite a few things. It kind of holds it, you know, where you are. I mean, once I heard Mein Liebling, David Sedaris, talk about how you create stories from memory. And I really agree with him. It comes from two places. One, it might have happened, but two, something more recent jogs the memory and connects that. So I have a lot of stories about when I was 8 years old. Like I have a story that I wrote about this aunt with enormous bazooms who came to pick the peaches off my peach tree in Queens, New York. And I didn't really think to write about it until I planted a peach tree up here in Maine. So it kind of connects, but life is like that. When you're older, you look back and you see things differently. And I'm kind of enjoying that process.
Making a segue from David Sedaris, someone's wondering if you have ever read a story for NPR. So clearly there may be a future for you and David on NPR.
I would love to. I've had some stories published in the Forward and in the Huffington Post, but I've never, and I perform all the time, but I've actually played on NPR, but as a musician, but I've never read a story on NPR. It would be fun. And showing sight, I would love to.
Okay. Your parents knew on the second date that this was it. They were meant to be. And you share with us the moment when your mother kicks off her shoes, first seeing your father's height of 5 feet 7 inches. Were they always this intuitively in sync with one another?
First of all, I have to tell you, my father hates that story. He hates it. He hates that it's like kind of the lore in the family. When mommy had to kick off her shoes. So to make up for that, my father has now decided that he is the world's tallest man. And it is absolutely not, it cannot be that my mother would ever be taller than him. They do have an intuitive way of being. Yes, it is actually nice and it's something to emulate. But it was pretty whirlwind. I mean, they got married, they met and were married within 11 months, and it would have been sooner, but I guess the hall wasn't there. This is in Philadelphia. My father's father was a rabbi, and they met when he was picking his parents up from doing a wedding, and my mother's Uncle Phil saw him sitting in the car picking up his parents and said, "Hey, would you like to meet a nice Jewish girl?" And my father said yes. And when my mother said, "Okay, but how tall is he?" Uncle Phil had only seen my father sitting in the car, so he goes, "Oh, I'm sure he's tall." So it was, my mother saw the real deal, and it was fine for her.
Okay. I think we have time for one more question. So, remembrance and memory, looking back, whether it's 57 years or 2 days, how do you think distance from events changes our perspective of them?
It's a very good question. I think it has to do, I think as you get older, I mean, I've seen my brain change this is actually the only good thing about getting older. If I can tell this to young people, it is a really good thing. When you get older, your brain, it's like the Yiddish expression, gesund in Keppel. Your brain feels comfortable in itself. I don't feel the need to push as hard. I understand people. I understand people so much better than I used to. I can size up situations better than I used to. And I think that things that, of course, when you're going forward in life, you know, you're 8 years old, you're 13 years old. I've written about times that, you know, everything is so intense and so scary and new. And then, like, when you look back, you're like, oh, you understand the motivation, you understand that you were younger, and I love connecting it, because sometimes I find myself wishing I could go back in time and not change things, but just have understood them better. No, we don't get that, but at least now I get to review my life with a more mature head.
So I misled everyone. One final question. Someone wants to know how tall your mom is.
My mother is 5'6". My father is 5'7". So it's not that crazy, you know. They sort of always looked about the same height when they walked into a room. She would wear, you know, medium-sized heels. The funny part was my first husband was 6'3". So when my father met him, he looked at me and he goes, "Lisa, you couldn't have picked someone taller?" But Sruli is 5'9", I'm 5'8", so I think I finally found the magic formula.
Well, thank you very much for your spirited reading. I'm looking at the chat bar. People loved your energy.
Thank you.
Mrs. Maisel. NPR, The Moth, HBO. Pass it back to David. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you both so much. That was lovely. And Lisa, I would encourage you to look through all the chat bar there. There's quite a lot of great things to see. So thank you, everyone. So we're going to move on to our next reader, our next author, rather. I'm going to introduce him, but before I do, I just wanted a couple of reminders. And one is that I wanted to give so if we have a gallery view, if you want to put it on gallery view, you can. By now you might be better at switching back and forth. I just wanted to give that silent applause. If we could do that right now, that would be great. So everyone put your hands up and let's give that silent ASL applause. Thank you so much. And you're going to practice that again in just a minute, because our next author has some kind of exciting news from this morning. Or at least I found out about it this morning. There's a headline: Maine Poet Laureate will use $50,000 grant to develop a youth program. And so our next reader is Stu Kestenbaum. And he has been selected among 23 poet laureates nationwide to receive a fellowship from the Academy of American Poets. So if everyone could give, again, just a big congratulations and applause there, silent applause for that. Congratulations, Stu. He is the author of 5 books, including Prayers and Run-On Sentences. His poems and writings have appeared in small press publications and magazines, Tikkun, The Sun, the Beloit Poetry Journal, and the New York Times Magazine. He was the director of the Haystack Mountain School of Crafts in Deer Isle for 27 years, where he integrated literary arts into the crafts making and the Summer Institute. And he's also the visiting artist at Bet Ha'am, and he has led a well-attended and inspiring poetry workshop as a visiting artist, excuse me. So without further ado, I'd like to have Stu take it away. He's going to read a selection that he has made for us this evening, a selection from his poetry. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks, David. Well, these are very unsettling times. I was thinking today, we watched the SpaceX Dragon being launched. At the same time, our cities were falling apart, and it reminded me of, if you remember, Barry Maguire singing "The Eve of Destruction." We're kind of back where we were, and in the future as well. And so I was going to read you a series of poems that are some related to religious themes. I hope I'm not going out on shaky theological ground, reading poetry at a synagogue and saying they're inappropriate. Not as the words would be inappropriate, but perhaps my theology might be off a little bit. But this first one is a kind of an out-of-the-body experience called Stepping Out of the Body. Like someone stepping from a pair of dirty overalls turned inside out on the bathroom floor, I step from my body. Words spill out, a pocket full of nearly, almost, close, rattling on the ground. I rise up and am eye to eye with the ceramic insulators on the power lines. They glisten, and I can see a fish-eye reflection of the stony landscape and worn blacktop. I touch the wire, and the current passes through me. I float above the trees like children's soap bubbles on a spring day. Everyone I love is below me. I see the tops of their heads as they go about their business. The school bus arrives and swallows my children. I'm here about to join everything the way bubbles burst with a quiet pop, the tiny strands of soap vanishing into the air. There are souls all around me, pushing, pushing. There is the world below me, caught by surprise in a spring storm. There is the ocean embracing each rock. I look down and can see the inside of my skull, the graffiti of dreams, the rust of education. Should I come back and inhabit this vehicle? Under the sign at the Redemption Center, people are returning their bottles with the thin, sour smell of beer and milk. Do we reuse the vessel, or do we crush the can so it becomes something else? Someone is embracing me with both arms, whispering, "Come home, all is forgiven." Am I coming or going? Between this world and the next, all I can tell you is this: something is about to be born. This next poem is titled Theology, seemed appropriate for Bet Ha'am. And one thing I was thinking about when I wrote it is that with my limited knowledge of Hebrew, that there aren't specific articles in Hebrew, as I understand. I'm looking at Lisa over there on the side. If she nods, I know I'll be okay. But so when you say Bereshit, it means in beginning. It could be in the beginning or in a beginning. So there's one more mystical school of thought, maybe from the Kabbalah, that there are many beginnings, there are many worlds, and this is one of those worlds. And Lisa nodded, so I know I'm okay on this one. Theology. God isn't watching everything, seeing who's been bad or good, so be good for goodness sake. God is weaving and sewing. God is mending and repairing what with so much that is tattered and frayed. God is remembering the past by sewing it into the future. God is making lace and making samplers, so many samplers the Creator has made, one for each moment. Every sampler has its own language, its own colors, its own chemistry, and its own music. God knows all the songs and all the elements, and at night she sings the world to bed. Sometimes she'll sing whole new worlds into being just by naming the stuff of it. Other times he'll get out the broom and sweep up the dust of the last universe, the grit and fluff, the shavings and the crumbs, the crumpled papers, and make a new world. That's the one we're living in now, and that's why it feels new and ancient at the same time. We begin our world where the last one ends. God has a barn raising, and we're all working with the Creator together, pushing up one wall at a time. People have begun to till the earth. reverently dropping the seeds in the furrows. God is becoming the seeds, remembering all the way back to the beginning of seed, which is a place where the light could sleep and dream, and then awaken and become what it needs to be in this world, which is being created and recreated this minute. Let us all bless it. A few years ago, I began to write a series of poems that I grew out of an exercise that I did where I would write a run-on sentence as a way to kind of free myself up in writing. And I began to see that actually was it was a devotional element to it. So it led me to write a whole series of poems, which I called prayers. And this one is called Prayer for Joy. Prayer for joy. What was it we wanted to say anyhow? Like today, when there were all the letters in my alphabet soup, and suddenly the J rises to the surface. The J, a letter that might be great for Scrabble, but not really used for much else, unless we need to jump for joy. And then all of a sudden, it's there and ready to help us soar and to open up our hearts at the same time. This simple line with a curved bottom, an upside down cane that helps us walk in a new way into this forest of language where all the letters are beginning to speak, finding each other in just the right combination to be understood. And most recently, I began a series of poems where I asked people I knew to send me words and I would have to use those in the poem. So it wasn't actually a poetic form, but it gave it a form in that I had words. So I had friends I had family members, artist friends, scientists. So I got just a series of random words, and my assignment was to make sure that I could put those in a poem. So I'm going to read you a few of those. And I don't think you'd need to know what the words are, but I'll tell you anyhow, because you'll have something to listen for. So in this poem, the words that I was given were creativity, crescendo, fruit, heavy, intentional, starfish, and wanderlust. Intentional. Forget about wanderlust. We've got to be here for some reason or other in this crescendo of creativity that we call evolution. Aren't we trying to turn into something less imperfect? Can't we be as wise as the fruit weighing down the branch? Such an elegant design to move the seed along in time. Or consider the intelligence of the cut-up starfish whose limbs can grow other bodies out of disaster. We've all got our burdens, but why do we always trot out heavy to modify it? Why not think of another adjective so that we're not always trudging into the next day? Who else but us could have imagined imagining? This next poem I wrote, it was before the election in 2016, but I must have been having some sort of prophetic vision. Not up there with Isaiah or anything, but anyhow, the words that I was given were cement, conflagration, deteriorating evergreen, flight, gawk, moonbeam, pinhole camera, row, satisfaction, serendipity, sharks, silky, sleep, thistle, and worth. How to start over. We knew that things were deteriorating. Gothic houses collapsing, sharks patrolling the lagoons, the born-again ministers warning of an immediate conflagration. All the flights to paradise had been canceled, and even pinhole cameras weren't letting light in. It got to be so bad we didn't want to listen to the news anymore, where all we were doing was gawking at someone else's trouble. It wasn't worth the effort. Where was the satisfaction we longed for? We couldn't sleep, so would spend all night watching the full moon's beams cement themselves to the silky water and travel for miles on the waves. Someone was rowing along the shore, and in the silver light, the evergreens were shaking slightly. At the edge of the forest, the thistles were attaching themselves to the fur of animals. What serendipity to hitch a ride to your future. This poem is called Decree. And the words I was given were cupcake, delirium, dog, emulate, evoke, loose leaf, marriage, equality, Newtonian, pizza, sliver, and swim. And I discovered there's a thing you can do in a poem. If you just say, let there be, it's like the, God creating the world, then you can do anything. You just say, let there be this, let there be that. And within that world, you've done it. So that's part of the notion of decree. Decree. Let there be equality in every marriage, and let love emulate Newtonian physics, falling down to earth from the heavens, so that we will understand that a pound of love drops at the same rate as a pound of iron or a pound of feathers. Only when love lands, it breaks into slivers of hope. Let the dogs roll in the shards and begin to trot deliriously in search of crusts of pizza and cupcake wrappers, and swim to the land of dead things to roll in, for hope is eternal in all our hearts, animals and humans alike. And while we're at it, let's gather up the love and put it in loose leaf binders and page through what was. Let was become is. Let our hearts learn to be. And this is my last poem, which was written, since I've been, since March. So I guess it's a pandemic poem. The work at hand. You wake from the dream, uncertain if you are living in this world or the next, pretty sure that no one is dreaming you, but unsure if someone might be dreaming this world, watering the flowers, shaping the clouds, and watching the birds build their nests, a skill or art or craft, a beautiful necessity, while we inhale and exhale the deep breath of our days, our anonymous days, our days of shopping lists and headlines, the days that we dream ourselves up and out the door and on our way to work. And what is our work but to scatter the seeds and dream ourselves whole? Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was amazing. That was really beautiful. I'm going to hand it over to Andrew again to do a Q&A with our audience. We have about 10 minutes for that.
Okay, thank you, David. And thank you, Stu. So in stepping out of my body, there's this wonderful Chagall-like image of floating above the world and your mind. And so would you share with us your process of writing poetry? Is it more like an out-of-body experience where your poems come from the graffiti of your dreams and the rust of your education? Or is there another source of inspiration and a more earthbound process of creation?
Well, I think that to me, the most important part is to have the poem be a journey so that I feel that I'm going somewhere I may have not expected to go. Obviously, to go up in the sky would be unexpected, but in any place in the poem that I may start with an idea, that poem was in that house we used to live in Deer Isle. We have since moved, but I was just looking at the utility pole, and there's this way the ceramic insulators look. Sometimes you would just see those as objects. People would look at those, and I think that just started me thinking of kind of being above. And then once I was above, it's a kind of what if situation. Well, if I were, then what would I see? What would I be looking at? And then I let that lead me to the next thing. So I think what I'm trying to do is always have the one gesture lead to another gesture.
Okay, thank you. Someone asks, if God makes a sampler for each moment, what does the sampler for this moment look like?
You have to ask God. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I don't know. I think it would be one with stitches would be like all over the place. It would almost be like, I think God may put the needle right through the holy finger. I think looking at this one, I don't know. That would be another poem.
Okay, well, I look forward to hearing one. There are a couple of questions that relate to your writing since March, and you did share your pandemic poem. So one person would like to know, how are the times today shaping your writing? So I'll ask that one first and then come back to another one.
Well, I suppose, we all know we're mortal. Only it's a time like this that seems a little closer to your face, the way wartime would, I guess. So I think there's some element of that, of the fragility of what our world is, and then also a sense of resilience in what our world is. So I think it's maybe somewhere between those things, and then thinking what our obligation is. The poems I've been writing since March, I've been doing this. It's a process that I've done where I actually write very slowly. I use a pen to start out, and I make letters with dots. I don't have any around here I could show you, but it's like so what it does is it really slows me down. And I feel a little bit like a Torah scribe, because I'll get to the end of a line and either I might stretch the letter out to make it get there, but I just have to keep on going. And they're kind of short, like squares that I'm writing in about that big. I finish those, and then I transcribe those, and then I work on those and write things from them. So that's how that last poem grew out of that. So with that, I'm just starting with a gesture. It doesn't matter where it's going to be. You just have to trust you're going to go somewhere once you do that. And so maybe that speaks somewhat to the time we're in now too, is, this notion, and I think to me, it's a kind of a big part of Judaism too, is like that it's important to act. You have to act in the world, even if you're not sure exactly where you don't know the answer beyond you're going to make the first step, that the first step is the action and the rest can follow. If you never do that, you're not going to go somewhere. So that's in a way, like the poems are a metaphor in that sense.
Okay, thank you. Well, you managed to answer 2 questions in one, and you didn't even hit the second one.
Oh.
So I'd like to echo David's congratulations on your grant from the Academy of American Poets. And can you describe the project a little more and tell us what inspired you to work with youth?
Well, since I've been poet laureate, I've wanted to do projects that'll bring poems to audiences that might not be thinking that they want to hear a poem, or they don't maybe afraid of a poem, or just in terms of how poetry was taught to them. So the radio program that I've done on Maine Public, another initiative was putting cards by poets in hotel rooms and inns around Maine. People used to come to Maine, tourists used to come to Maine, you remember, just a little while ago, and they would go to rooms, and the idea would be they'd get a poem by a Maine writer in a room. So the idea is just to let people know that poetry is a vital thing and it's around them. And so the idea of working with the Telling Room is it's a great program of young writers, many of whom are refugees, immigrants, and others are, all kids 8 to 18. And it's a great, those voices are the voices of the future. It's the voices of Maine of the future, maybe a more diverse Maine than we have right now as part of it. And I think the idea is to just be able to honor the kind of eloquence of those young voices, and people could hear them and hear their poems. So that's really where it grew out of.
Well, I'm very excited to hear those poems when they come out. I know that you'll be working with Maine Public as well to give a wider audience to their work. Someone wants to know about the poems that you create out of words. Do they come from a single person, or do they come from a variety of people?
Oh no, they came from all different people. I just wrote to friends. It started out, I was a visiting writer at a school in North Carolina called Penland after I left Haystack, and because at Haystack I would read poems to people. Somebody there asked me to read a poem to their class, not my poem, but a poem by somebody else, and after I did, the teacher said, "Oh, you're like a tinker. You come here and read us a poem." I said, "Well, you know, if I were a tinker, you'd actually give me something and I would repair it. So why don't you give me words and I'll make them into a poem?" And they did. And I just liked that, you know, like you can have words I myself would never use in a poem. Like one grouping, I had the word salubrious. I just would never use salubrious. It's just not like the late Senator Everett Dirksen might use salubrious, or, you know, William Buckley, but I wouldn't, but I did because it was in the poem. So it takes me out of my own self somewhere else, but it winds up being me. So anyhow, the people, you know, I just wrote to people, said, send me words. They send me words, and then I just pick them out of a hat, like 10 words at a time. So I don't know what I'm going to get till they're there, and then I have to do something with it.
So it's almost found object poetry.
Yeah.
Except with words.
Yeah.
Okay. Someone loved the idea of poems being left at hotels for visitors and wonders if you have thought about doing a landscape poetry project, because people are walking around and noticing things. So you've already done.
No, I wanted to do one for the bicentennial. What I did for the bicentennial is we have a series of films, Mainers speaking poems by Maine writers. So Governor Mills spoke 2 poems. If you go to Maine Public Bicentennial poems from here, you'll see all the ones, and they're aired on Maine Public Television too. But I wanted to do it with the highway signs. So I was going to ask writers to do something that would just be, you know, you only get like 2 blinks, like, you know, buckle up for safety or you'll be dead, like something like that. But I got as far as the Department of Transportation, and because they had funny ones for the Super Bowl and other ones, but they said to do that, it actually Maine kind of pushes it a little bit. It always has to be about highway safety because that's how it's funded. So I thought that was just a little too much weight to ask a poet to have a poem about highway safety in like tweetable length. So I abandoned it. That's as far as I got. But I love the idea, you know, like the old Burma Shave ads, you know, that people would just see something in a landscape is a great idea. I think the more you can have poems where people don't think, we're so used to thinking about a poem, mostly I might not get it, or, oh my God, do I have to listen to it? That if you can put it in some context where somebody says, oh, that's a poem, that was okay. That took me somewhere else. Yeah. So maybe another year.
Well, we have a lot to look forward from you, and you've given us a lot to think about this evening with both your answers to these questions and your poems. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
And David, it is back to you.
Thank you so much. We'll do a nice round of ASL applause there. Thank you. What a privilege to hear these pieces, and also to hear some of the artistry and process that goes into them and the thoughts. So really appreciate everyone taking the time to ask those thoughtful questions, and to our authors for sharing. I do want to say, if one of my behind the scenes tech crew who's doing all that magic can put a link, we'd like to put a link into, we did earlier, but let's put it in again, to Stu's published books. And also, you know, the raffle has closed at this point, but if you were interested in making a donation, we're going to put that link in too now. So those links will be in the chat bar. Great. So our next author is going to be Steve Steinbach. And Steve was actually my teacher in Hebrew school just a few years ago, and is now out on the West Coast, I believe. So Steve is a very multifaceted guy, a freelance author, journalist, book reviewer. He has a Doctor of Hebrew Religious Education, and has written a number of books and teacher's guides on that. So I'm excited to introduce Steve. He's going to share with us a piece called Found in Translation. So without further ado, take it away, Steve.
Okay. I've been a teacher of Hebrew and Judaica for my entire adult life, and even a few years before that. When my wife Sue and I moved to Maine in the early 90s, I also became a part-time writer and a full-time stay-at-home dad. But for 23 years, I continued to teach at Beit Ha'am, at the JCA, the Levy Day School, and the Melton program. Father, teacher, and writer. That's how I saw myself. 5 years ago, when my youngest son Sam graduated from high school, I left Maine and moved to Richland, Washington, 200 miles east of Seattle. Sue had taken a job there. Richland is the birthplace of the Manhattan Project. Nestled between the Rockies and the Cascade Mountain Range, it's a desert region, both geologically and culturally. Not a lot of Jews there. I was a teacher of Hebrew and Judaica in a land of Mormons, evangelicals, and Spanish-speaking Catholics. The big event of the year there is the Christ the King Sausage Fest. So there I was, retired from my job as a dad and out of work as a Jewish educator. What was I going to do with my time? I've been trying to teach myself Japanese for a while, but I hadn't gotten very far. I could read it and write it. I could recite basic dialogues from textbooks, but I had never really spoken it. Why Japanese? What attracted me most is how beautifully foreign it is. If you're looking for a language that's most different from English, you couldn't go wrong with Japanese. Learning any new language forces you to reframe the way you think, but with Japanese, I felt I was turning my brain inside out. The grammar rules I was familiar with no longer worked. A long sentence can completely change its meaning with the final letter. To understand Japanese means negotiating nuance and subtleties, polite and humble forms, and ancient colloquialism. It's a language in which ambiguity is an art form, where men and women speak in different styles and often with different vocabulary, and no one can use the word no without sounding confrontational. Japanese is a hard language to learn, but I had a lot of time. So I bought books and I found websites and apps and podcasts, but I still had no one to practice with. In Richland, Washington, there are even fewer Japanese than there are Jews. A year into this project, I discovered a website called Italki. Imagine a social network site like Facebook, but instead of using it to stay in touch with relatives or to track down your high school prom date, you're using it to find language partners. Over 5 million members, speakers of several hundred languages, all seeking to make friends and find teachers in the language that they're trying to learn. You can write essays in your target language and have native speakers correct your grammar and comment on what you've written. You can ask and answer questions in 130 languages. And for $10 to $20 an hour, you can hire a teacher to work with you on Skype. So I began making friends and finally finding opportunities to speak Japanese with real people. For several years now, I've been video chatting with a chemical engineer named Sonoko. Each Wednesday, she reads to me several pages from Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, and I read back to her from a 1936 Japanese detective novel. My friend Yuichiro is a web designer and a driving instructor from Nagasaki. 3 years ago, he messaged me, "Steve-san, I'm coming to America. I want to come to Richland to see where Steve-san lives." A month later, I picked him up at the airport in Portland, Oregon, and for the next 2 weeks, we traveled around Oregon and Washington State. Then there's Chizuko. She works for an English language school in Osaka. This week, she read to me an article in English about using manga as a tool to learn Japanese. She asked me to explain certain words and to correct her pronunciation. She got really hung up on the word simultaneously. After several minutes, she threw up her arms and said, "That's impossible. No one can pronounce that." So the challenge of learning language goes both ways, especially for Japanese people trying to pronounce English. We have a lot of sounds that don't exist in Japanese, consonants and consonant blends that Japanese find nearly impossible to pronounce. Last month, another one of my friends, Hisako, had created a Facebook group for Japanese people preparing for an international English language exam. For their first event, she asked me to teach a class. The ad that she wrote up went like this: Pronunciation with Steve-san. From his home in Seattle, Steve-san will teach a pronunciation lesson on Zoom. Learn how to make the sounds L, R, and V so you can say coronavirus like a native. 3 months ago, I made my first trip to Japan along with my youngest son, Sam. I finally had a chance to use the language that I've been learning. I got to see Yuichiro in Nagasaki, Shizuko in Osaka, Hisako in Tokyo, and other friends all over the country. It was an amazing trip. It was also the beginning of a global pandemic. When we left for Japan, there were only a handful of COVID-19 cases in the US. When we returned, Washington State was in a state of emergency. So these days, I mostly stay at home. I continue to study Japanese. Along the line, I also began learning Chinese. I read, translate, memorize, and chat with friends across the planet. I found that on Italki, the best way to find new friends is to answer questions and correct essays posted by other members. So I search specifically for questions posted by native Chinese and Japanese speakers. 2 months ago, I came across a question posted by a new member named Ishiwata Hiroyuki. But his question wasn't about English. He was trying to read an article in Hebrew, and he had come across a preposition that didn't make sense to him. His profile photo showed a young Asian man wearing a clerical robe with crucifix designs. I introduced myself and answered his question, and we've since become friends. He is Father Ishiwata, a newly ordained Catholic priest, waiting for the virus to pass until he can be assigned a parish. And meanwhile, he's teaching himself modern Hebrew. In one of his letters, Father Ishiwata said that in an article he was reading, he came across the phrase, Pok Kavur HaKelev, which literally means, here is where the dog is buried. Really, he asked. Is it really talking about a buried dog? I did a little research and I found that Pok Kavur HaKelev is a Hebrew idiom, which means this is the heart of the matter, or this is the bottom line. It's a translation of a Yiddish expression, and that itself is a result of a mix-up of an archaic word for buried treasure and the German word for dog. When you think about it, our own expressions, heart of the matter and bottom line, don't make much sense either. Anyway, about 2 or 3 times a week, Father Ishiwata sends me an email filled with questions and comments about Hebrew. Just a few days ago, he sent me another interesting email. He asked if I had heard of the Genji Monogatari. Well, sure. The Tale of the Genji, written 1,000 years ago, is considered the first novel, but I'd never read it. Father Ishiwata said that most Japanese people haven't read it either, because Japanese has changed so much in 1,000 years that no one can understand it. Ishiwata's question was, if a book written in Japanese 1,000 years ago is so hard for Japanese people today to understand, how is it that the Hebrew of Isaiah and Jeremiah, written more than 2,500 years ago, can be so similar to modern Hebrew? I began writing my answer to him, and I said that English classics like Beowulf and the Canterbury Tales, they're also incomprehensible to most English speakers. Japanese and English have been evolving. But Hebrew is different. Instead of evolving, Hebrew just took a nap for 2,000 years. And it took Eliezer ben Yehuda to wake it up. In 1881, the Zionist scholar moved to Jerusalem and began writing a modern Hebrew dictionary and pushing for the revival of Hebrew. As I was thinking about this, I got a song stuck in my head. Does that ever happen to you? It's a really silly children's song. It's one that I learned when I was in grad school in Jerusalem. I belonged to an entertainment troupe that performed at hospitals and orphanages. And the song goes like this. Hine rakevet, shemistovevet, agagalim, agagalim, agagalim. Toot, toot. Words are very simple. It just means, here is a train. It is rolling on wheels, on wheels, on wheels, toot, toot. Well, for the next 2 days, I couldn't shake that song out of my head. Then I sat down to finish my response to Father Ishiwata. I still had that song in my head, and they didn't have choo-choo trains in biblical times, but they did have chariots. I stopped what I was doing and I went to Wikipedia. It turns out that Eliezer ben Yehuda invented the word rakevet by adapting the root for chariot, rekev, to fill in the meaning of locomotive. In fact, from the very first word in the song, hine, to the final word galgalim, I realized that if I were to sing that song to Isaiah or Jeremiah or anyone in ancient times, they would understand every word except for toot, toot. So once again, I'm a Hebrew teacher, but now I'm doing it in the comfort of my own home in a time of isolation, and I'm doing it in Japanese. By the way, I'm no longer living in Richland. I'm now just outside of Seattle in a house on the side of Tiger Mountain. We see a lot of rabbits and deer, fox and coyote, and last week we were visited by a very large black bear. But that, my friends, is a different story.
Thank you so much. I love that ending. I actually have a question, but I'm going to wait until make sure we have time for our audience. So take it away, Andrew.
Okay, thank you, David, and thank you, Steve. So someone wants to know, are you writing stories in Seattle besides this one? And if so, what languages are you using?
No, mostly, I'm doing a lot of translating now. I translated a story from Chinese that's going to be appearing in a short story anthology, and I'm working on a Japanese story as well.
You write about Eliezer ben Yehuda waking up Hebrew, and what has studying Japanese and Chinese woken up for you?
The biggest thing is, as I said in the story, it turns my brain inside out. It's really, it's exciting seeing things in completely different ways. When I try to write to someone, I'll often, if I don't know the words, I'll use Google Translate to get the basic words. But then I discover when I do a reverse translation, I translate it back into English, and I find that what I've said makes absolutely no sense in Japanese. So I now have to think in terms of what's the essence of the word I'm saying. I have to be careful of using colloquial expressions from English.
Okay. How and why did you expand from Japanese to Chinese?
Well, it's a funny story. That anthology that I translated the story for, the editor contacted me. There's one story that he wanted to include in the anthology, and it only appeared in the Chinese original and in a Japanese translation. So he thought, oh, Steve can translate this. And as I started working, there were a lot of phrases that didn't make sense. And I thought, maybe just looking at the words on the page in Chinese, it might inspire me. And it turned out that right in the second line of the story, there was a phrase in the middle of a sentence on that second line, and I knew exactly what it meant. It was a character for people and the character for mouth, followed by the character which means not or negative, and then the character for large. And in Japanese, that expression would mean not a large population. And that actually turns out to be exactly what it meant. And I got excited. I said, I can learn Chinese. And so I got some books. I went online. I started meeting people practicing my Chinese. It's really exciting to expand learning both of them. They're very, very different from each other.
Mhm. Thank you. Do you find that Kabbalah lends to your perspective in a special way since you've returned from Japan?
Kabbalah, yeah, in a weird way, Kabbalah does a lot of things with letters. Letters have significance. Letters comprise words. Well, in both Chinese and Japanese, particularly in Chinese, where words are composed of pictures, a sequence of pictures grouped together to form a single character. I'm now, when I look at a Chinese word or a Japanese word that uses kanji, I now see in pictures. And that's Kabbalistic.
You mentioned that Japanese was a level 4 language, and so someone wants to know which language you find more difficult to learn, Japanese or Chinese?
They're totally different from each other. The irony is that Chinese is really easy to understand. It's such a logically structured language. If you know the basic words, the syntax just falls into place and you know what it means. The trouble with Chinese is you can't pronounce it. I get stuck on the CH and the SH sounds, like shi versus shi. They're two different sounds. They have two totally different meanings in Chinese. I can barely tell them apart, rather than, let alone pronounce them correctly. Japanese, on the other hand, is very easy to pronounce. It's much easier for English speakers to pronounce Japanese than it is for Japanese to pronounce English. But Japanese, the sentences are so complicated. You have to think like Yoda. The sentences actually work backwards. So that's the challenge of Japanese.
Wow. So someone wants to know if you have a Japanese or Chinese mystery story in your future.
I don't know. It's a mystery to me. But that's a good idea. I like that idea.
Okay, well, look forward to that. I think that is it. So thank you very much, Steve, and also to Stu and Lisa for sharing your writing about what binds us together, whether it's love or words, an act of creation, or our humanity, no matter what language we speak. So back to you, David.
Thank you, Andrew. Yeah, what a privilege to share this evening with everyone. We are going to wrap up soon, but let's give a big round of applause to everyone that was involved. It was amazing. Thank you. And before we wrap up, we have a few things we need to do. One being to announce our raffle winner. So we don't have any sound effects for this. So what I'm going to ask everyone to do at home, and you won't hear me do it, but at home, I want you to give a big drum roll, please, right now with everyone in the room. Even if you're alone, you have to still do it. All right, so drum roll, please. And the winner is Amy Brusselback from Chicago. So congratulations, Amy. We're all very excited for you. She has won that fabulous trip. I think there's a choice of trips, and so that's very, very exciting. So congratulations. And before we do close out the evening, I know that Toby wants to say a few words.
Well, first of all, I have loved this evening. I have been mesmerized and drawn in by every one of our readers. And I've watched your faces as well, so I know that you have enjoyed it. And it has really brought us together as a community in a way that has been difficult to come together during this time. I want to say congratulations to Amy, who is Donna Landau's daughter, should that name be unfamiliar with you. It's hard to let this evening end because it's so enjoyable. I do want to give one more plug. Yes, the raffle is over. It's still possible to make a donation to Bet Ha'am, and I hope one of our wizards will put that link in. I think it's already there. If you love this evening and you want to support this kind of work and all the wonderful things that we're doing here, please feel free to make a donation of even $1. It's always helpful. I just love this evening. It's been a lot of hard work to put it together, but I'm so pleased with the way it came together. Thank you to everyone. And since we're thanking people, I want to thank the committee of people that helped me put it together. So I hope one of our wizards will put up that poster. First, the poster of the committee members, and I won't name them for you, but I think it's, you can see their faces. Some of them were on the committee, some of them were advisors. We couldn't have done it without you. So I thank you very much. And then we would also like to thank our host committee, who so generously made donations and got us going towards a wonderful success. We won't be able to tell you how successful we've been until after this is over, and it will be posted in our newsletter and various other publications. But I know we've done very well. And money is not the only thing that we've done really well. And this has just been a glorious evening, and I want to thank everyone. And David, we're sending it back to you again.
Okay, and thank you, Toby. You have been an instrumental part of this and working very, very hard on all of this. So we really appreciate your hard work as well. And it's so nice to see all of the chats. I see people with their dogs in their laps. I see families. I see all different types of settings. So it's really, really been a pleasure to be with you this evening. And as Toby said, you may not want this evening to end. And what we're going to do, if you want to actually discuss a little bit, maybe you just are buzzing, you don't want it to end, we're going to stay until maybe 10 o'clock at the latest. The background crew and I just here, and we'll put you into breakout rooms if you'd like, and we can chat amongst ourselves. If this is where you'll be leaving us, enjoy the rest of your evening, and thank you so much for coming to A Different Story. Thanks and good night. Good night, Rachel.